back, boxing fans, to another late night boxing talk with Sean on boxing. So let's get to this. I just filled out my weekly prediction, and so I'm going to go over it with you guys. Let me just fix that. There we go. So let me just go over my predictions and some of the great fights we have this week. This week is a good week of boxing. A lot of fights going on this week and a lot of intriguing fights that probably a lot of people won't be talking about. But here we talk about boxing, so we're going to be talking about even the fights casual American YouTubers refuse to acknowledge. So this weekend on Wednesday, which I guess is tomorrow your time, we have a card. The one fighter from this card that really sort of translates, and this is a pro box fight card, and this is a guy who's been doing quite a bit on pro box lately, and gradually really building his name and really making himself relevant in the light heavyweight division, and that is Naji Lopez. Naji Lopez, who is currently 10-0 with 8 KOs. He's going to be fighting Stephen Sumter, who is 9-0, one draw with 7 KOs. So two undefeated fighters, both up-and-comers. Obviously, you figure Naji Lopez is the favorite on this, but they're putting him in with an undefeated fighter, somebody that doesn't know how to lose, and somebody that's obviously coming to make their name off of Lopez's name. So it should be a pretty intriguing fight. I'm predicting Lopez for the victory in this fight. He's a hard puncher, but obviously a guy that if he wants to be elite, he's got to continue to stay busy and continue to improve his skill set. And that's the one thing you can say for pro box. At least they're getting him out there a lot. And that's exactly what a young guy like him, who obviously doesn't have that many fights on his resume, needs to do. He needs to stay active. So that's great news that he's going to be fighting this weekend. Also, two of my favorite fighters are going to be on a card on Friday. One card, the cards are not the same cards. They're obviously from different parts of the world. We have one card which is pretty good. Olympic gold medalist Albert Badagayev, the 130 pound fighter, currently 10-0 with 7 KOs. He's going to be fighting John O'Carroll. People that watch UK boxing are familiar with John O'Carroll. He is 24-2-1, 7 KOs. Not the biggest, hardest puncher, but a guy that's been in world title contention, a guy that's been fighting world-class opposition. So for a guy like Badagayev, who's only had 10 professional fights, including one fight he fought against his Cuban arch rival in what I thought should have been considered a pro fight, but for some reason was considered like not a pro fight. I don't know what it was. It was hard to watch. It wasn't really televised anywhere. But obviously, when you have two Olympic medalists, one silver medalist, one gold medalist, and they're both up-and-coming prospects in the pros, and they're meeting, that's a great fight. But unfortunately, I guess both of them were eager to do the fight, but didn't want to put it in a position where potentially it could stop their role in the pros. So somehow it's not really listed on either of their pro schedules. But for Badagayev, getting in there with John O'Carroll is a good fight. Obviously, it's going to move him even more significantly in the rankings, and hopefully we'll be able to start getting word for him potentially fighting for a world title sometime soon. I see this fight is going to be for the WBA interim featherweight title, and so it'll be interesting to see how that pans out. Obviously, him against the current WBA champion, I think that's a great fight. I think Badagayev beats him, but obviously he's facing a guy who's a world champion, coming off of a good victory in his last performance, even though I don't know who the hell he fought. Like, John O'Carroll is a more accomplished opponent than the guy he fought recently, who literally I've never heard of before. So, I think Badagayev, obviously with his 300 amateur fights, Olympic gold medal, very good pro resume so far, is a guy that's being underlooked and underappreciated. So I do expect him to be a champion sometime soon. The question is with him, if he does become a champion at 130 pounds, who is he going to be able to fight? Obviously, most of the other titles are controlled by Top Rank ESPN, and he's currently not affiliated with them. Obviously, he's Russian, so that's sort of slowed things down, obviously because of the whole Russian-Ukrainian situation. Also, one of my historically favorite fighters is coming back after his fourth career loss, losing to Juan Francisco Estrada quite a long time ago, and that is Roman Gonzalez, currently 51-4, 41 KOs. He's getting in there for a fight back in Nicaragua, returning back to his home, bouncing back. Obviously, we've heard all the rumors about him sparring and working out with Bam Rodriguez prior to Bam's fight with Estrada, and we know how well Bam looked. He looked world class. He looked pound for pound. So it'll be interesting to see how Roman Gonzalez looks after his long layoff. He's going to be fighting Robert Barrera, who is 27-5, 17 KOs. It's a 10-round bounce back fight at bantamweight. So you can see what Roman Gonzalez is trying to do. He's chasing after that fifth weight class, moving up to bantamweight, where potentially he can become a 5-weight world champion. And just in significance of that is a very significant accomplishment. There's only been less than 10 fighters in boxing history in the modern era who've become 5-weight world champions. For Roman Gonzalez to do that, especially at this point of his career where he's like 37 years old, that would be pretty intriguing. It'd be interesting to see what champion he would chase after. Excuse me. Obviously, we know he's connected to Tekken Boxing, a Japanese promoter. He obviously was based in Japan early on in his career before becoming a little more well-known and transitioning over to the States later on in his career. So obviously he's got connections in Japan. It should be easy to make a fight, but it'll be interesting to see what opponent he goes after. We obviously have Inui's brother, who's the WBA champion. Of course, we have Junto Nakatani, who currently is the WBC champion. And then we have two younger world champions for the WBO and the IBF title. So I would think he would probably chase after one of those younger fighters, one of those less accomplished fighters. And then if he's successful in that, then potentially we could see him fight maybe Inui's brother in what would be a pretty big unification fight. Or maybe even a Bam Rodriguez if he chooses to move up to his third weight division. But nonetheless, that's a pretty intriguing fight. I'm excited to see Roman get back in the ring. Obviously, the worst thing about these kind of historical great fighters is the fact that eventually they do retire, they do leave the sport, and you won't get the pleasure of getting to see them fight any longer. So we have to sort of, enjoy the opportunities we have left before that eventual sort of career end comes. But yeah, so we will see what Roman Gonzalez is up to. Saturday, we obviously have a big card coming from DAZN, and this is a pretty good card. I mean, obviously not the biggest card we can get from DAZN, but overall the card itself is pretty fucking stacked, full of some pretty good fights I'm pretty interested in. Jared Boots Ennis is getting back in the ring to defend his IBF championship versus David Avician. It's a great fight. Some people tried to make it out as if somehow David Avician is not a quality opponent, but that's just casual boxing talk mentality. He's a solid fighter. Obviously not the kind of guy we expect Jared Boots Ennis to lose to, but for his first title defense against a veteran fighter with a lot of experience, it's a good stay busy fight. It's a good first defense of his IBF title, and obviously after that we hope to see him in unification fights, right? We don't want to see him continue to fight guys like David Avician. We hope to see him fight world champions, right? So we have to wait and see how that unfolds, but that is obviously what people are hoping for moving forward, and only time will tell. But we do expect that DAZN will be fronting the money to make those fights moving forward. We got our fingers crossed. Let's hope that's exactly what happens. And then, of course, you have Jalil Hackett, the PBC fighter who just recently left the PBC to sign with DAZN, along with John Ennis. He's currently 8-0 with 7 KOs, and he's fighting a really good opponent, Peter Dobson, 16-1, 9 KOs. This is a really, really solid opponent for your first fight with DAZN. If he goes out there and looks fantastic against Peter Dobson, it's really going to put him right high up there in the rankings at welterweight. And the welterweight division is not the strongest division in boxing right now. So for him, there's definitely a lot of opportunity to do something, and they potentially could move him towards one of the other champions, and then somewhere down the line, we potentially could see a Jalen Hackett versus a Boots Ennis somewhere down the road. Obviously, Hackett's only had 8 professional fights, so that fight's not going to be anytime soon. But it'll be interesting to see what he does against Dobson. Dobson's a solid opponent. I mean, if we were to throw Peter Dobson in with David Avician right now, that would be a really good fight. A solid matchup between 2 veteran fighters. Also in the undercard, you have Henry LeBron, no relationship to LeBron James. He's currently 19-0 with 10 KO, and he's fighting a very solid opponent as well in Christopher Diaz, 28-4, 18 KOs. It's a good opponent, solid opponent, and I'm very intrigued to see how it works out. I think obviously LeBron is going to beat Christopher Diaz, but Christopher Diaz is no punk. He's going to come to work. It should be a great matchup stylistically between 2 very good junior lightweights. So, I'm intrigued by that fight as well. Then, of course, we have Sky Nicholson, 10-0 with 1 KO fighting. Not a fight that I'm too interested in. And then we have Khalil Cole, 8-0-1 with 6 KOs, fighting Manuel Galapagos, 22-1 with 17 KOs. Again, Khalil Cole is being put in really tough, right, for a guy who's only had 9 professional fights. That's the one thing you can really look at these DAZN cards, and you can see that the opponents are solid, right? They're not throwing these people in with bumps. Sky Nicholson's fighting a girl who's 19-1 with literally 12 KOs, right? That's a really good opponent. Cole fighting a very good experienced fighter with 23 professional fights, 17 KOs, and he's only had 9 professional fights. LeBron obviously has had 19 fights. He's fighting a guy with well over 30 fights in Christopher Diaz. Hackett, 8 professional fights, fighting Dobson, who's had 17 professional fights, right? Even when you look at John Ennis, who is 31-0 with 28 KOs, fighting David Avician, who's 30-4-1 with 18 KOs, right? A very good opponent, very solid opposition. You could easily potentially see some of these guys end up getting potentially beat, right? Potentially. Because the one thing you can say about DAZN is they definitely put their fighters in tough. That's why so many of their fighters end up getting beat and losing their titles. Then, of course, you have the ESPN card as well. Obviously, I'm excited. I get to watch the DAZN card because DAZN is global. The ESPN card, unfortunately, I'm going to have to stream that. So, that is a bit of a pain in the ass. I'm still waiting to see the Keyshawn Davis fight. I saw highlights on YouTube, but I haven't been able to watch the whole fight because I didn't get to see it live last week. And the channel that I go to that always uploads fights hasn't uploaded that fight yet. So unfortunately, I'm still waiting to see that fight. And it looked like it was a really, really good fight as well, from what I could see in the highlights and from what I've heard. But on this ESPN card, of course, you have Janabek Alakumene, 15-0, 10 KOs, a unified champion, currently the IBF and the WBO champion. Obviously, we know that right now Lara is the WBA champion and that Adames is the WBC champion. Hopefully, we'll get to see Janabek against one of those 2 fighters somewhere soon, specifically Adames, which would be a really, really good matchup. But in this fight, he's fighting some Russian fighter who literally I've never heard of. 21-0, 13 KOs. Just because I haven't heard of him doesn't mean he's not good, but it does beg the question, what kind of quality of fighter is Andrei Mikhailovich? So we will see. Maybe he'll come out and surprise me, or maybe he's just going to be a cherry pick opponent for Janabek. We also have Raymond Muratalla, 20-0 with 16 KOs, fighting Tevin Farmer. Tevin Farmer, who obviously was a 130-pound world champion quite a few years ago, back when Tank Davis was a world champion at that weight. Now he's fighting at 135 against Muratalla. Obviously, for Muratalla, if he gets a successful victory in this fight, he's going to be putting himself into potential big fights down the road at 135 pounds, whether that's against Lomachenko, whether that's against Keyshawn Davis, whether that's against Dennis Barancek, whether that's against Shakur Stevenson. We'll have to wait and see. But it's great to see that there's so many really good opponents at that weight. Right now, when we think about a Muratalla, when you think about a Zepeda, right, you know, really quality fighters that obviously are not the champions, but are guys that would be good opponents for the champions, even a Keyshawn Davis. So I'm interested to see how that fight unfolds. I do think that Muratalla is going to be too much for Farmer. Farmer was never a hard puncher, but now he's at a bigger weight. He's a small, diminutive guy. So I do expect him to get stopped in this fight. Then, of course, Ruben Villa is also on this card, 22-1, fighting Suleiman Segua, who is 16-4-1 with 6 KOs. I do expect Villa to win this. If you look at all these fights from ESPN, once again, it's a lot of what we saw last week. They're in with good opponents, but they're not in with 50-50 opponents. They're in with kind of showcase opponents, opponents that they should look good against, right? And that's what we saw last week when obviously O'Shaquie Foster was in there with his opponent, and obviously Shakur Stevenson was in there with his opponent. They were fights that were showcase fights, kind of like when we saw Teofimo Lopez versus that Canadian guy, another card from ESPN, which was really more showcase fights than legitimate 50-50 fights. But I can't complain. ESPN is consistently putting out deep cards and really highlighting the young guys. Also on this card, you have Jonathan Lopez, currently 15-0, 1 KO, facing Leonard Padilla, 23-5-1, in an 8-round junior lightweight fight. So obviously for Lopez, this is a good opponent, solid opponent for him. Lopez is not much of a puncher, only 1 KO in 15 wins. So, you know, what do we expect? Unanimous decision from him. But overall, this is a solid weekend of boxing. We have 2 very good cards. Obviously on Sunday, my time, Saturday night, your time. One from DAZN and one from ESPN. If you're fortunate enough where you can watch both of them, congratulations. That's excellent for you. For me, as I said, for the ESPN cards, it's a little unfortunate when we're able to watch them on that other streaming link that was popular. What was it? Triller, or whatever it was before it was Triller. I think Triller bought it out and merged, and they used to show all the ESPN fights there. And of course you had to pay to watch them, but it was excellent to be able to watch them on a quality sort of platform. Now I'm sort of shit out of luck. So hopefully ESPN makes a deal internationally soon so that I'll have more access to these fights. But overall, I get to see Romy Gonzalez back in the ring, which is fucking excellent. I get to see Batagayev back in the ring. He's one of the young up-and-coming fighters I'm really impressed by. And I think him fighting at 130 is perfect. I know he was previously fighting at 135, but I think it was too premature for him to be at that weight because he's not a very big fighter. He's small. Eventually he'll grow to 135, but in the meantime, he's probably better off to win a title at 130, fight some titles there, maybe try to unify some titles, and then if we see him move up to 135 as a unified champion, a guy who's proven himself, it'll be much more interesting. And there's quite a lot of good opponents at 130 right now, with O'Shaquie Foster, Consacao, obviously Valdez, Navarrete, the WBA champion. I don't know why I always forget his name. A guy who lost to the military dude that used to be the WBO champion. Jesus, this is part of aging, forgetting names. But overall, it's going to be a good weekend of boxing. I'm excited. I will be going live on Sunday, so feel free to jump in, join our chat. It's a good chat, you know, except of course for the odd troll who comes in. But outside of that, it's just people that are boxing fans talking about boxing. So I'll see you there. Have a good weekend, or a good week, what's left of it, and I'll see you this weekend. Enjoy. Peace out.